Let me read Philippians 4, verses 1, 2, and 3. That is our text this morning. Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown. So stand fast in the Lord, beloved. I employ Euodia and I employ Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Verse 3, and I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. I should add, the book of life is a massive book in heaven. That book consists of all the names of all the people in heaven and the names of all the people that are going to be in heaven. My name is in that book, and if you're not certain your name is in that book, then please see me after the service and we can remedy that situation. In 1992, Los Angeles riots started in April after a mostly white jury acquitted 4 black police officers accused in the videotaping beating of a black motorist named Rodney King. And those of us that are older remember this vividly. King had tried to escape from police. King had an extensive rap sheet, but he didn't deserve to be beaten. But those 4 white officers were acquitted. Well, that created a tremendous problem. Thousands of people in Los Angeles joined in what has been characterized as a race riot or a miniature civil war. It began in the evening after the verdict had been announced, and then it peaked in intensity throughout the next 2 days and even continued for some time after that. Continuous television coverage, especially from helicopter news crews, riveted the nation and shocked viewers as parts of Los Angeles went up in flames. Stores were openly looted, innocent bystanders were beaten, and rioters shot at police. The California National Guard troops were deployed to help control the situation, and even federal troops were called in to put an end to the disorder. Estimates of actual death resulting from the riots range from 50 to 60 people, and another 2,000 persons were injured. Estimates of material loss reached $1 billion. That $1 billion in 1992 would be equal to $2.29 billion now. Some 3,600 fires were set. Some 1,100 buildings were destroyed. It was so intense, fire calls were being made once a minute at some points. It is said that altogether about 10,000 people were arrested, and that does not count the arrests made from the smaller but similar incidents of civil unrest in other cities. San Francisco arrested 1,400 rioters in the downtown area and established a curfew. The Nevada National Guard was dispatched to Las Vegas and arrested 200 rioters, and other cities were also affected. But the rioting had become so intense that on the 3rd day, an emotional Rodney King interrupted the television coverage to announce to the public the famous question that has been repeated so often since then, and that question was, can we all get along? Can we get along? He would repeat that question in a subsequent interview, and he rephrased it as, can we all just get along? In essence, that same question is being addressed at the beginning of chapter 4. And that is because Paul wrote this section to encourage reconciliation between 2 conflicting congregants at Philippi. Verse 1, one more time. Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown. Notice how much Paul loved and missed his Christian brothers and sisters at the Philippi congregation. So stand fast in the Lord. Satan wants nothing more than to create an unstable environment in the church. He wants that for us now. Because of that, Paul is going to encourage this congregation to stand fast or stand firm against the destabilizing threats from Satan. And to stand strong and firm has always been God's instruction to the Christian. 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 8, for now we live if you stand fast in the Lord. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 15, therefore, brethren, stand fast, and hold the traditions which you were taught, whether by word, meaning by what we said to you in person, or our epistle. An epistle means what we wrote to you in a letter. 1 Peter 5, verse 12, by Silvanus, our faithful brother, as I consider him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God in which you stand. Instability is a serious problem. The Christian that is unstable in his spiritual commitment is susceptible to severe discouragement and doubt and disappointment and spiritual ineffectiveness. Unstable people are more susceptible to temptation and more apt to be crushed under troubles and tough times. That's the reason Paul tells us to stand firm. And that command to stand is translated from a Greek word, steko. And that word, steko, is the main verb in verses 1 through 9. It is an imperative verb, and it means to remain stationary. Stand firm, stand still, stand stationary. It is a command that has a militaristic connection to it, because just as troops on the front lines are commanded to stand their ground and be unmovable in the heat of battle, Christians are commanded to hold fast their positions, stand firm, stand strong in their positions in the spiritual battle against Satan, and not collapse and not retreat under difficult circumstances and times, as we are going to discuss in the next verses. Verse 2, I implore, essentially beg, Euodia, and I implore, or beg, Syntyche, to be of the same mind in the Lord. Starting in this verse, Paul addressed a serious threat to this congregation's stable environment. He identifies the problem in specific language, and he actually cites the name of two different female congregants that were engaged in a personal conflict. It seems that for some unknown reason, these two women at Philippi were at odds against one another, and that conflict between them was contributing to congregational instability. And this is the reason Paul begged them to be of the same mind in the Lord. Consultants have said 85% of employee turnover is the result of employee conflict and relational problems. I believe the most important skill set is people skills. In the Peanuts cartoon, Lucy said to Snoopy, there are times, Charlie Brown, when you really bug me, but I admit that there are also times when I feel like giving you a big hug. Snoopy said, yes, that's the way I am, huggable and buggable. The problem is some of us are more buggable than are huggable. And because of that, there can be conflict. There's arguing, infighting, power struggles, silent standoffs, and personalities clashing. And to be intellectually honest, I have sometimes contributed to some of that, as probably most of us have. The women at Philippi had a personal disagreement between them. These women were Euodia and Syntyche. These two women are mentioned nowhere else in Scripture. And the specifics of this particular disagreement between them aren't mentioned either. But there are three things we do know about them and this situation. One, first, these women were church members and not troublemakers from outside the congregation. These women were church members, not troublemakers from outside the congregation. So this was an in-house situation. Second, this disagreement between them was not about a doctrinal issue. It wasn't about a doctrinal issue that had become a problem. If it had been a doctrinal question, then Paul would have resolved the issue through siding with the one woman that held the correct position, and then he would have chastened the one that was mistaken. Paul always corrected erroneous false teaching, so that couldn't have been the problem. Third, these were prominent women in the congregation who acted as assistants to Paul. These females weren't fringe people that just sat on the sidelines and didn't participate. These women were active participants ministering in the church. Paul urged Euodia and urged Syntyche to resolve this interpersonal conflict and to be reconciled to one another, because he understood division, discords can create instability, and that can be fatal to a congregation. He used the word employ to indicate that he was in a pleading mode as he addressed these women. And that meant he literally begged them to resolve this issue. In essence, he predated that question from Rodney King and said, ladies, can't we all just get along? Then please notice something interesting. The verse reads, I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche. Notice he repeated this phrase, I implore, twice, and he said it to each one of them. And in doing that, he gives us the impression that this was a fault on both sides. So that means that most of the time, interpersonal conflict is a two-way street. If there's a personal grievance between two people or two people groups, there is most certain a measure of fault on both sides. Both parties are at fault to some degree. Sometimes a personal dispute is so long-standing and so serious that it calls for a third party to act as an objective and unprejudiced arbitrator to come between those who are in conflict to help bring about a reconciliation. And that is what Paul is attempting to do. Verse 3, and I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. This phrase, these women, referred to Euodia and Syntyche, who earlier on had been a real asset to Paul, assisting him in ministering there, because it is said these women labored with him in the gospel. Notice Paul specifically addressed these instructions to someone called his true companion. It is not said who this true companion is, which is the reason some people have tried to guess his identification. Some have suggested it might have been Barnabas. Okay, but if so, why doesn't Paul call him Barnabas like he does in every other case in the New Testament where Barnabas is referred to? So it's probably not Barnabas. Someone else has suggested it was a person named Zenguza, because Zenguza is a Greek transliteration or respelling of the word companion. Someone else said it was a husband to one of these women, which is doubtful. Understand something. If it was important that we know the identification of this person, this true companion, then God would have told us. But since he didn't, then it doesn't matter. But what does matter is Paul appealed to this anonymous person known only as a true companion, and Paul essentially asked him to be an objective, unprejudiced arbitrator and to intervene in this dispute and use his influence to bring about a solution to this conflict. Now, since conflict among us is inevitable, let me mention 5 practical suggestions on how we can get along. Suggestion 1 is to incorporate what is called the 101% principle. Incorporate the 101% principle. If I meet someone and I know I'm going to be involved with this person, and I perceive this person to be probably a difficult person in a relational sense, some people don't have the best social skills, people skills, and I determined that this could be difficult, then I ask them probing questions. I ask them questions to find the one thing that we agree on. I want to find the one thing we have in common. I want to find the one thing we both feel passionate about. And then once I have found that one thing, I give that one thing 100% attention. That means that the 1% of agreement between us is going to act as the connection that pulls us together. It becomes the tie that binds us together in a relationship. The 100% of effort focused on the one thing we have in common is the 101 principle. Some have suggested that the biblical text that supports this principle is found in Luke 15, verses 4 through 7. This could be a stretch, but let's consider it. In Luke 15, there are three interrelated parables. There's the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son. The parable of the lost son is better known as the parable of the prodigal son. The shepherd in this text had 100 sheep and then lost one of them. So 1% of his total number of sheep was now missing. The shepherd then ignored the 99% of his sheep that were fine, and he went after the one sheep until he found it. He essentially gave 100% of his attention and effort to finding the one sheep that was lost. That is the 101% principle. S. Truett Cathy died in 2014. We should thank God for S. Truett Cathy. He was the founder and president of an extremely successful food chain called Chick-fil-A. Before college, our oldest grandson, Caleb, worked for Chick-fil-A in Northern California, and he's just been hired to work at the Chick-fil-A restaurant on the campus at California Baptist University in Riverside, where he attends college. He's an electrical engineering major, and he's all about Chick-fil-A. I should add that Truett was also a sincere and committed Christian. He taught a Sunday school class at First Baptist Church, Jonesboro, Georgia, for more than 50 years. Truett once shared how he incorporated his adaptation of this 101% principle. He said, in the early stages of Chick-fil-A, we were anxious to advertise our product. One day an idea dawned on me. There were competing newspapers in town, and the editors of these papers wouldn't walk on the same side of the street with each other. There was serious conflict between them. Since everyone knew about their feud, I invited the two editors of those respective newspapers to meet with me. I asked each one individually if he'd come down to the office and discuss Chick-fil-A placing a full-page ad in their newspaper. Now, neither of them knew I'd called the other one. Once they got there and found themselves face to face with each other, they knew something had to be up. I said, gentlemen, if you can do one thing for me, then I will give you both newspapers a full one-page ad. All I want you to do is sit down over there in that booth and eat a chicken sandwich together. When you get through, shake hands, we'll take a picture, and then add a caption reading, "We disagree on many things, but there's one thing we both agree on. This is the best chicken sandwich we've ever eaten." And both men agreed to do that. And I'm sorry, Chick-fil-A is good. We should use that principle, the 101% principle, in minimizing interpersonal conflict. Suggestion 2 is to love people more than our opinions. Love people more than we love our opinions. Let me itemize some of the different biblical injunctions on love. Christians are encouraged to put on love, Colossians 3, verse 14, but above all things, put on love. Love is to be prioritized above everything else. Second, follow after love. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 1 reads, pursue love. Pursue meaning to chase after. Chase after love. Third, abound in love. Philippians 1, verse 9, and this I pray that your love may abound still more and more, meaning we are to overdo love. Number 4, increase, continue in love. Hebrews 13:1, let brotherly love continue. 5, increase in love. 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 12, and may the Lord make you increase and abound in love to one another and to all, just as we do to you. Number 6, be fervent in love. 1 Peter 4, verse 8, and above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Number 7, be consistent in love. Philippians 2, verse 2, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love. Number 8, provoke one another to love. Hebrews 10, verse 24, and let us consider one to love in order to stir up love. Number 9, be sincere in love. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 8, I am testing the sincerity of your love. People, there's no question. But God has said we are to love one another. Don't be like the cartoon character Charlie Brown, who said, I love mankind, it's just people I can't stand. That's not the love we want. The point is that we are to love people, and we are to love them more than we love our opinions. Now, I'm convinced everybody is opinionated. I've been accused of that, but I've seen it in everyone else. We're all opinionated about certain things, and that's okay. We're entitled to our opinions. But the injunction is to love people more than we love our opinions. Unless those opinions relate to the essential teachings of Christianity. Opinions that are essential to the survival of the historic Christian faith would be an exception to that principle. Love people more than opinions means love people more than those opinions of ours that are non-essential personal preferences. Listen to me. A person who loves his preferential opinions more than his friends will end up defending his opinions and destroying his friendships. Let me repeat that. A person who loves his preferential opinions more than his friends will end up defending his opinions and destroying his friendships. People who are not effective in personal relationships usually have a higher regard for their opinions than they do for people, and that is sad. One classic and extreme illustration of this love people more than opinions principle would be the strange marriage of Mary Magdalene to James Carville. This is an example from politics. Let me explain who these people are. Mary Magdalene served as an assistant to President George Bush and a counselor to Dick Cheney. She also hosted CNN's popular debate show called Crossfire. In the late 90s, she hosted her own popular radio talk show, The Mary Magdalene Show, and she has also served as the chief of staff at the Republican National Committee. Mary Magdalene is an ardent, fierce, conservative Republican who idolized people like Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh. Okay, here's the kicker. She is married to James Carville. James Carville is one of the most successful political strategists of all time. He is probably best known as the chief campaign strategist for the Clinton-Gore campaign in 1992, and he is an extremely polarizing Democrat. He has made such statements as, a good Republican is one who doesn't want anyone else to know it. And Republicans want smaller government for the same reason crooks want fewer cops. It's easier to get away with murder. Now, he's full of inflammatory accusations against Republicans. He's all over the media now. Since this most recent election this past November, since his party lost, he's all over the media. I'm not sure why. And every time he's a Louisiana Cajun, every time I see him, he's this sourpuss, this cranky, grumpy old man. He's sitting there cussing, moaning and groaning and complaining about his own political party. And I understand he has some justifiable accusations, but he's a very unhappy man at the moment. The ironic thing is, these people are actually married to one another. Both of them have had remarkable careers in politics, although representing polar opposite political perspectives. But Mary Magdalene and James Carville have chosen to love one another more than their personal political opinions. And that's how their marriage has worked since 1993. And that's how all relationships can work. I should add, a contributing factor could be that Mary Magdalene and James Carville have a house rule, and that house rule says we do not mention or discuss politics at home. I don't see how it would survive any other way. Suggestion 3. is to give people the benefit of the doubt. Give people the benefit of the doubt. 1 Corinthians 13, and I have an entire series on this, probably 12 messages in total. 1 Corinthians 13 mentions 16 different qualities for agape love, meaning maximum love. According to verse 7 in that text, characteristic 13 reads that love believes all things. Now, don't misunderstand that. This phrase, love believes all things, doesn't mean that love is indiscriminate and gullible. No. This phrase, love believes all things, means love believes the best in someone. Instead of being suspicious of someone and eager to pronounce someone guilty, love believes the best. Love doesn't go through life cynical and suspicious, suspecting everyone of doing something they shouldn't have done, and love doesn't jump to premature conclusions. Just like the two women who were sitting at a breakfast table, and one of them noticed through the window the neighbor's car pulling into the driveway. And the woman of the house said, "I cannot believe how dirty, how filthy my neighbor's car is. It's just horrible, filthy." Her friend got up from the table, walked over to the window to see for herself, came back to the table and commented, "No, your neighbor's car is fine. That dirt is on your window, not his car." That's jumping to premature conclusions, and love doesn't do that. Love gives people the benefit of the doubt. I have found that we tend to rationalize for ourselves. We rule ourselves with our hearts, but we rule others with our heads. We have mercy for ourselves, give me a break, but we have law for someone else. We need to learn, and it is a lesson to be learned. We need to learn to give people the benefit of the doubt. I might just add, I'm preaching to me, the whole thing. I'm guilty of all this stuff. Suggestion 4 is don't overreact to personal conflict. Don't overreact to personal conflict. One classic biblical case of someone who overreacted was Simon Peter in his defense against the mob that had come to arrest Jesus on that Thursday night, Maundy Thursday of Passion Week. Some have estimated that between 600 to 1,000 men, most of them soldiers, came to arrest Jesus in the garden. To me, that's a little overkill, but that's what happened. John 18:10 states that Simon Peter had a sword on him, I assume for self-defense. He had a sword, and he was upset at this mob arresting Jesus, and so he swung his sword and sliced off the right ear of a man named Malchus. Jesus reached down, picked up this severed ear, reattached it to the head of Malchus. That had to be so cool. And then told Simon Peter to put up his sword. Simon Peter had overreacted, which complicated matters, and people, it always does. Consider this analogy. If there's a fly on the wall, then all we need to do to solve the problem is a fly swatter, not a shotgun. Speaking of insects, Steve Tran from Westminster, California, wanted to rid his apartment of cockroaches. So he strategically placed, get this, 25 activated bug bombs throughout his small residence. But when the spray from the bug bombs reached the pilot light of his stove, it ignited, blasting his screen door across the street, broke all his windows, and set all his furniture on fire. Steve said, "I wanted to kill all the cockroaches. I just thought if I used a lot more repellent, it would last longer. But according to the label, just 2 canisters, not 25, would have solved Tran's roach problem." The blast caused $10,000 damage to the apartment building. And get this, according to Mr. Tran, on Sunday he saw more roaches walking around. That's a classic example of overreacting. I tend to be experienced at overreacting. I have sometimes used a nuclear warhead on a problem that a BB gun would have sufficed. Consider this analogy. Suppose in a metaphorical sense, conflicts are the same as fires. And that's not difficult to imagine because a conflict can get extremely heated, just as a fire does. A conflict can get out of control, as a fire does. So a potential conflict represents a potential fire. So in that case, using the conflict representing fire, each of us are given 2 5-gallon cans. One can contains water, which if applied correctly helps extinguish a fire, but the second can is full of gasoline, which essentially adds fuel to a fire. Can full of water, good. Can full of gasoline, bad. Question: if we're facing a potential conflict, a potential fire, which can are we going to pour onto the fire? If we react to the problem as we should, then we pour water onto the fire. If, though, we overreact to the problem, we are in essence pouring gasoline onto the fire, and the fire just intensifies and spreads, and that complicates the conflict. Again, I've emptied gasoline on fires. So in the end, the problem is worse than it was at the beginning if we overreact. Christian, don't overreact. Someone said, if we're facing potential conflict, then play it down and pray it up. Play it down and pray it up. Suggestion 5 is don't retaliate if you have been hurt through conflict. Don't retaliate if you have been hurt through conflict. Invariably, people get hurt through conflict. It might be a bruised ego or hurt feelings. It could be a damaged reputation, and the trauma of it all might have caused some emotional scarring. There's no question conflict hurts. And if you are an unfortunate and hurting victim of conflict, you are going to be tempted, as we all are, you're going to be tempted to fight back. Don't do it. The reason is retaliation just perpetuates the conflict. If each of you is intent on getting even, then it is never going to end. Never. One of the classic passages on this subject is found in Romans 12, starting at verse 17. I will teach through this entire text in more specific language at another time. But notice verse 17, repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. Verse 18, if it is possible, and sometimes it is not possible, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, and we are only responsible for ourselves, live peaceably with all men. Paraphrase, be a lover, not a fighter. Be a peacemaker. Verse 19, beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Verse 20, and these instructions, understand, are addressed to individuals and not nations. So these statements are not applicable to the United States and its relations to North Korea, Iran, and other evil regimes. Although I need to add, Israel at this moment, Israel as a nation is practicing this text. Israel has donated to date since October 7, 2023, Israel has donated over 1.3 million tons of aid to the Gazans. Israel is literally feeding its enemy. In addition to Hamas, most Gazans want Israelis dead. What other nation during wartime would do what Israel is doing? The verse reads, verse 20, therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. That is an interesting comment. I'll explain another time. It doesn't mean take a portable barbecue of charcoal and dump it on his head. Get that out of your head. Verse 21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I heard about an entrepreneurial woman who had a thriving business called Enough is Enough. Enough is Enough. Her clientele were those persons who wanted revenge and wanted to get back at someone. For instance, for a modest fee, you can purchase what is called a get-back gift. One option is that this gift might consist of a dead, smelly 10-pound codfish and some red roses all wrapped together in black crepe paper. And for an additional fee, you can have it hand-delivered to that special person you want to get back at. People, do you understand? According to this passage from Romans 12, this woman's business was illegitimate because we are not to be in the business of getting back at someone for an offense or hurt that has been caused. According to verse 20, we are to overcome evil with good. For those of us who sit here in sanctimonious, pious mugness and feel like all this is beneath us, let me remind us that although retaliation sometimes might be some external act, more often than not, retaliation is an internal attitude. Let me explain that. Because of conflict, we might have been hurt. And since hurt people, we fight back against the one who hurt us. Maybe not so much externally, but we fight back from the inside. It's called bitterness. On the outside, we might seem to be cordial and polite to this person that hurt us, but on the inside, we are punching this guy's lights out. That is basic bitterness, and bitterness is two things. One, bitterness is a sin. Short and simple, bitterness is a sin, and God cannot bless bitterness. Second, bitterness is just not smart. Rephrased as bitterness is stupid. Tokyo police arrested a man that admitted being upset at being denied admission into graduate school 14 years earlier. Since that time, he had averaged 10 irate phone calls to this man each night between the hours of 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. He averaged 10 irate, revengeful phone calls to this former professor whom he blamed for keeping him out of graduate schools. Those 14 years of revengeful phone calls totaled up to more than 50,000 phone calls. So how smart was that? What a waste of someone's time and energies. Question why wasn't he arrested much earlier? I read a bumper sticker that read, "Love your enemies. It confuses them." Bitterness is not smart because it doesn't hurt the one for whom it is intended. It hurts the one who is bitter. Bitterness is the same as drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. Bitterness is like the Aborigine who got mad and tried to throw his boomerang away. It came back and knocked him unconscious. That's what bitterness does. Even though bitterness is aimed at someone else, it comes right back at us. No one is more miserable than a bitter person. Bitterness is a form of revenge and a form of retaliation, which just compounds conflict. God said, don't do it. In the 1800s, the famous London preacher Charles Spurgeon had a minister friend, Dr. Newman Hall. Dr. Hall wrote an excellent book entitled Come to Jesus. The title of his book, Come to Jesus. It is said that another minister from the London area published an article in which he totally ridiculed Dr. Hall. Pastor Hall did nothing for a time, but then that slanderous article started gaining in popularity, so he sat down and wrote a scathing letter of protest to this man. His answer was full of anger and bitter retaliatory statements that outdid anything in the article that had attacked him. But just before he mailed the letter, he took it to his friend Charles Spurgeon to read. Spurgeon read it carefully and then handed it back and said that it was an excellent letter, but he added, it lacks just one thing. After a pause, Spurgeon continued, underneath your signature to this letter, you ought to write the words, author of Come to Jesus. The two men just stood there and looked at each other for what seemed to be minutes, and then Dr. Hall tore that retaliatory letter to shreds. Christian, don't retaliate. Commit it to God. Vengeance is his, no matter how much we might have been hurt from conflict. Let's bow our heads as our men are coming to serve us communion. Father in heaven, we're grateful for your word. Hope that what we said today made sense. I pray that it did. This is very important. So, Lord, I just pray that you'll bless this time of communion. We're sitting at the table of the Lord, and we want to do so with great reverence and seriousness, and I pray that you'll honor that. So we commit this time to you. In Jesus' name, amen.